The SciComm Collective acknowledges the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of the lands we study, write and record on, and that their sovereignty was never ceded. Hello and welcome to the SciComm Collective.
Different useful knowledge in different areas.
The joy is sharing it.
Making science accessible.
The ignored final step of the scientific method.
Every different perspective.
Science is culture.
The SciComm Collective brings science and science communication to you.
Hi everyone and welcome back to the SciComm Collective. This is the very first episode of our winter short series, where we'll be exploring a mix of topics throughout the season, hearing from students, alumni, and other voices within science communication. I'm Ximena and today I'm joined by Dr. Heather Bray, Head of Science Communication at UWA, and Siobhon Eacott, a UWA Science Communication alumni, who now works as a communications and engagement coordinator at the Western Australian Health Translation Network. This episode features a recording from one of the SciComm Collective's very first workshops, where Heather and Siobhon will be diving into interview skills, especially the difference between interviewing for radio versus live settings. Stay tuned to find out more.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Ximena, for welcoming us. And it's lovely to be here on Whadjuk Noongar Budja for our interview skills workshop.
Thanks, Heather. Now, Siobhon, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Siobhon Eacott and I actually work here at UWA, technically. But I work for WA Health Translation Network, which is up at QE2. So you might not see me here on campus.
Thanks, Siobhon. Well, today we'll have Siobhon and Heather interview each other, so be aware it might get a little meta this podcast episode. So Heather, what do you think is the outcome or the outcomes for this workshop?
Ideally, just have you understand the basics of good interview technique, and I guess particularly understand that there are different types of interviews and some different approaches that we can use in each of those things. And the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about is live versus pre-recorded. I'm doing the live part, and versus pre-recorded, but also doing them online versus in person, because that's a skill set that Siobhon has, and we want to talk through that. And as well as that, in line, when we come back to me, I might also throw in what's it like when you're interviewing someone, even though who is not only remote, but you're speaking to me, which is another challenge again. I'll be able to make available to you a lecture that I use in SciComm 2208 Science Writing about interview techniques, and also provide you with some good blog posts and things like that that are useful for interviewing techniques, and also resources from the Oz Science Media Centre that you'll be able to have as well. Now, before we just move into modelling our interviews, I did just want to say that there are multiple types of podcasts. There are monocasts where one person might be speaking, or there might be the kinds that we're interviewing here where it's fairly clear that one person is the host and interviewing and the other is the guest, where we're probably aiming at no more than 30% of the volume being me, of the airspace being me or my time, and at least 70% of the time is actually the guest. But there are other ones where it might just be a conversation between two people, and where the flow of time goes about 50-50, but we're not doing that. Or we might end up sort of modelling that more towards the end. But we wanted to model more specifically the types of situations where you are definitely the host and that you've invited a guest to come along. So I'm going to be the first host, and normally, if I've not met the person before, I would have made sure that I'd had a chat with them. And if it's the first time I'm actually physically seeing them, I would have welcomed Siobhon into the space, said, hi, welcome, hope the drive wasn't too hard, hope you found a park. And I would have done something to make her feel comfortable in this space, making sure she's got somewhere nice, comfy to sit, drink water and everything like that. So we're just going to assume that that's all been done. But that is an important part. And for me, even as a host, that time is important as well, because right now I'm kind of trying to dial in a certain persona that I have when I do this. And that persona, first of all, doesn't swear. So there's a little part of my brain going, that's right, I'm professional now. I've got to adopt this persona where I'm a professional and where I can kind of focus on the now and just hope that my brain and mouth are connected. So not worrying too much on what I'm saying, but really starting to focus in on Siobhon and what she's doing. But for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to be interviewing Siobhon. And as I said, the main part of interviewing techniques that we're going to be covering is as if this is a podcast, which means at any time Siobhon could go, oh, hang on, can I have that again? Or I could go, I'll ask that a different way. So we'll try to sort of model breaking that wall and also being able to sort of come back, which, of course, you can't do live on radio. So that's why I'm going to be trying to do my part without a single mistake, or how to cover it if you do. That's what I'm going to do. All right. So let's kick off. So as we know, we usually have some kind of introduction, and even if because we're pre-recording it, it doesn't really matter if this kind of ends up getting stuffed up. But usually you would make sure that the guest at least says their name in full and gives their affiliation so that you've also got that. So I'm just going to do my little sort of intro and sort of do the welcome. I know that feels a bit weird because we've already been talking for 5 minutes, but I'm just going to do that and then just try to get into our conversation. And hopefully it will flow nicely between the two of us. So, hi, Siobhon. It's lovely to have you back on the program. Welcome back to UWA, and thank you so much for spending time with us today on the SciComm Collective. So we're talking about interview techniques, but before I get into that, can you just tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into science communication and the kinds of things that you do as part of your work?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Heather, for having me on the podcast. It's such an honour, really. So my background is, as you know, Heather, I did science communication here at UWA. So I did my undergrad in science communication, the undergrad as well as conservation biology. And then I started off doing my master's here in science communication as well. I got my graduate diploma, and I've basically ran with it. Now I do science communication, and I've been in a few roles here at UWA, doing science communication, but also doing a lot of the background work in science communication. It's a lot of strategy and sort of taking a step back from that. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for that. So in what sort of roles have you or do you interview people for your work?
Yeah, so, I started off doing podcasting and things. My first experience was literally in science communication, presentations. I remember doing my little podcast on my own and thinking, oh, this is so funny. And I don't think I ever got used to the sound of my own voice. I will be honest about that.
We might come back to that, actually. I think that's such an interesting point. But you're telling us about where you do interviewing now.
Yes, so then I went into my first sort of big girl role at UWA in working in alumni, where I worked sort of behind the scenes on the production side of podcasts. I helped out, editing the podcasts, setting them up. I also did a whole bunch of interviews, not for podcasts, but for written pieces, for like biographical pieces, for alumni, for that perspective. Which always involved me basically taking an hour to interview people. So that sort of experience fed into my next role at, again, UWA at Weedsmart, just over that building there. For everyone listening, that's literally a building right next to us, in talking about agriculture. And I have no background in agriculture, so this was a massive learning curve. It was one of the most scary things I've ever done in my life. And for some reason I said, yeah, I'll do the podcast. I've got no information. I've got no background. I've got no knowledge about herbicides, about very complicated things. And it was terrifying. It was one of the scariest things I've ever done, but I did it.
I definitely want to ask you more about that. But I think there was a couple of things and you mentioned that you're also podcasting now, though, as part of your health job. Yeah.
A little bit. I'm sort of working on beginning that sort of thing at the moment. But again, healthcare is a little bit similar to agriculture, where it is incredibly complex. Don't know how I managed to get ourselves into such complex fields, but here we are.
Well, that's part of science communication, isn't it, is dealing with complexity. But you said there that you were interviewing for writing and you mentioned that it was different to podcasting. Can you tell me a little bit more about how it might be different?
Yeah. So first of all, when you're interviewing for written pieces, you've got to think about what quotes are you getting. That's really what I came from, because a lot of the time when you're interviewing for written pieces, you know a lot about the person already. You can do a lot of research that you can write up elsewhere. You don't always have to necessarily talk to the person to write a piece on them. But if you want the specific experiences they have, their perception, which is what makes a written interview so special, you have to interview them. And that was so different because it's, you know, you've got time to ask them a billion questions. You can rephrase it. You can do whatever you want, which, again, kind of similar to podcasting, but you're thinking about what it's like written. So, you know, when someone tells a story on a podcast, letting them tell the story is so important, right? But if you do it written and they're telling a story and it takes forever, you can't exactly put that straight into words. So there's a lot of difference in that. It's easier to do interviewing for written, I will say, but it's funner to do it on podcasts.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that, you know, when you're interviewing, you almost have to have the final thing in your mind.
Yes.
And so that you're almost you're still looking for audio, but it's just that it's just written audio. Yeah, it's literally a quote. But yeah, so you had that freedom to ask silly questions 3 or 4 times, which you may not. Certainly wouldn't in a live interview.
Yeah, definitely. In my experience, I have asked some very silly questions, to be honest, both on podcast and in written. So don't think you ever grow out of it.
Well, I mean, that segues into what you were talking about before, which was going into an area to do science communication where you don't have a scientific background. Can you tell me a bit more about what that was like for you?
So as I said before, terrifying. But how I tackled that was a sort of combination of things. First of all, research. You can never underestimate how much it helps to deep dive onto everything. Don't leave it to the last minute. It will trip you up if you don't have a real solid grasp on what you're talking about. It doesn't have to be super in-depth, because when you're talking to someone and you're trying to get answers out of it, if you know more about the topic than they do, sometimes you sort of jump the gun in asking them those questions. I find that you've got to not be the actual expert. You've got to set the expert up. Yeah. You know, you can't be asking questions with the answer in mind. Ask the question with the full curiosity of, I don't know this. Can you teach me?
So I think that's really interesting what you're saying there, because, again, part of the skill of interviewing, or part of what we're really talking about today, is not necessarily the ability to make ourselves look good. And you hinted at that when you were talking about, you know, working in the background, and we can probably have a more philosophical discussion about science communication and that a bit later. But yeah, the idea that you're setting the expert up.
Yes.
And so the questions that you're asking, when do you find that you're trying to almost be the audience?
Yes. It's kind of like what you said before. You were thinking of an endpoint for written interviews, right? I find with podcasts it's a little bit looser, but I still have it in mind of, what is this supposed to be? I can't just have a conversation with someone that's going nowhere. I've got to make sure that it has a, I guess, underlying theme of what is this podcast about? Mm-hmm. And the way you do that is you throw it to the person. You've got to make sure you're playing that game of tennis of, like, here's the question, or here are the hooks. How does your interviewee take those? Can they take them? I've got to throw them constantly, you know.
Yeah. So for you, an interview is like a game of tennis where you're throwing the ball up or hitting the ball, serving the ball to them, and you want them to bounce it back to it. But you are thinking about how high, whereabouts that first ball is going to go. Trying to get them to say the thing that you think they should be saying, not in terms of the answer, but the thing that's going to make that work relevant for your audience because you're the expert in it.
Yes. Why are people interested in what I'm doing right now? That is really the key to try and keep in mind.
And so in a field that's not your own, how much research would you have done?
Oh, so much. I know way too much about herbicides now. that I'm not sure what to do with. But
can you give us an example? Can you give us an example of a podcast that you did, like 4 hours, 6 hours, 20 hours? Like,
gosh, finding out what propisamide is.
Okay.
Is this the sort of information you're after?
Yeah. So tell us about that. I mean, again, just given that this is pre-recorded, I guess what I'm trying to, when we say lots, how big is lots? So what I'm looking for you is to give us kind of an example of, what is a lot of research for you? Would it be hours? Are you reading papers, or are you just Googling? So that's kind of what I'm looking for. So I'll say that question again just so that you can answer. Okay. That's what I just did. Did you see it all? Right. Cool. Okay. So I'm going to ask this question again. Now that's quite important for the audio. Now, so that you also give yourself a space to cut and then just go, so that's what I'm really looking that's what I'm asking you. And this is almost so meta because what we're talking about is exactly what I've just done. In that what we're talking about is, that bit we just before is like, how do you get your interviewee to give you the gold? So one of the things you can do is go, just stop the tape almost. It's like, this is the gold I want you to give me.
Yeah. You've got to explain to them, like, I will actually
tell you what I want.
Yeah.
And then we'll go again.
Yeah.
So let me just pause. So can you give me an example of what a lot of research means, or how you might prepare for an interview where you really know nothing about the topic?
Yeah. So, I mean, my first point of contact would actually be to talk to my interviewee and say.
So you start with them.
Yes.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm not going to them being like, can you help me write all the questions for this? Not always the best idea unless you know them very well. Then you can absolutely do that. Going on a meta level. But when you've got your interviewee and you're not quite sure what you're supposed to be asking, have a chat with them. Call them up or send them an email and be like, this is sort of what I'm thinking. And by that point, you don't have to have all the knowledge. You don't have to know everything about their topic. Tell them what you're thinking, and they will tell you if it's something they can speak on. And because you don't want to go further than that and realize that, this isn't even like what they're speaking on. This isn't the topic really that they want to talk about. Because I have had that happen where I assumed maybe a agronomist or an expert was going to talk in more the science side of things, and then I've gotten to the interview and I've gone, they're more policy, or they're more talking about what it's like on the ground. So I need to make sure from the get-go we're on the same page. From there, I can even ask them, do you have any really good resources that, is about your work or is, would be amazing for me to help? I mean, I also had the luxury in my last role of the people I was interviewing were very much aware that I was new to my field, and I would tell them that I know nothing about this field. So if there are any questions that you think I should be asking, you can just tell me. And again, this is the luxury of a podcast, is that you can literally stop and be like, hey, am I missing something here? Is there a question I can set up for you to hit back to me?
Yeah.
So super amazing to do that. And from there, basically take in the resources that they have, do your own reading, form a nice list of questions, have extras for when you're not sure where to go, and basically just jump into it. Because, I mean, really the best thing you can do is practice. It's hard to sit here. Even now, I haven't done podcasts for a little bit. It makes me nervous to sit here and answer these questions because I'm trying to think, where am I going with this? Am I setting up Heather? What am I saying? Am I saying too much? Oh my gosh. And then you get in your own head. Try to not get caught in the cycle, because as soon as you get caught in the cycle, your own head, it stops.
But I think that's why I was sort of talking about, being able to sort of dial in to the space as well, because dialing in is the point where I'm able to settle some of that noise, but still be able to observe me in the moment and do the thing in the moment.
Exactly.
So for you mentioned it's like a game of tennis, and so you definitely see the interviewee as your partner in this.
Yes.
And so you're able, in many of the jobs you've been able to say, I don't know very much, and kind of work with the guest to kind of say, look, both of us are part of this and can we get it through? Have you ever been in a situation, though, where that is probably not okay and that you've really had to go in, It's not the kind of person you can have a casual chat with and say, hey, can you tell me what I should be asking you about this paper?
Yes.
Have you been in that kind of situation? And then what did you do?
Absolutely. I freaked out.
Okay. and then.
So, yeah, it's difficult to be in that situation where it's almost like that game of tennis it's not so breezy. It's not so, you're trying to throw things up and maybe they're not realizing. And it's not, and you're not getting as much grace on the things that you probably need to have.
It's there you just kind of have to grit your teeth a bit and just go, yep, this is not going to be an enjoyable game of tennis, but I'm going to throw that ball.
Yep. There were many periods of silence where I'm going, okay, I'm trying to figure out the next question. Bear with me. You know, I'm really trying to figure this out. It's really hard because there's only so much you can do in the moment.
Yeah, and the rest you'll just pick up in editing, right?
Literally. Thankfully, podcasting, we can get back to it.
At least you've got that ability. But I think, I mean, if you were to sort of summarize your take home from your experience in podcasting for wannabe interviewers, what would that be? If it was like, what would you say are the top tips that you've learned from your experience?
Whatever you're interviewing about, be curious and make sure it's authentic curiosity, because it is a little bit like a superpower of once you get curious about something, and sometimes it can be so hard, like with agriculture, I'm not really that interested in it, but there are things about it that I could find so interesting, and that's what summons those questions on the spot of, oh, actually, I can throw this ball up again, to let them hit it back to me. It's out of nowhere, and I'm just like, oh, I just want to know that. It often felt like, to me, I was asking questions for myself because I was just interested, but from a listener's perspective, those are the best questions to ask.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the SciComm Collective podcast today. We look forward to hearing more from you on the podcast later.
Yes, definitely.
And normally I would do that sign off. Now I've gone a little bit over time. Well, probably not because we had that bit at the beginning. But
to be honest, speaking on a meta level, this is how long I would usually take before doing an interview to get comfortable with someone.
Yeah,
I'd speak
10 minutes.
for 10 minutes to go, this is what we're going to talk about. How do you feel about this? How's your day? You know, take this time.
That amount of time is about right. Yeah. No, and that's why I do think that allowing yourself that time and your guest and that time to develop that rapport together is really important.
Yeah. It can be hard.
Yeah. So, switching up.
See, this is a bit, I was actually nervous about.
Whereas I'm fine. We're transitioning now to sort of live.
Yeah.
I've got to stop talking now and being the host.
I mean, I'm going to run this as if I'm also on live.
Yeah.
Which is terrifying to me because that's not something you do.
No, it's not.
But I'm going to give it my best go. So, Heather, thank you for sitting down with me today to talk about your experience with radio, your experience with interviewing, to speak to all of our students.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you. See, I shouldn't have thanked her then. So I guess we'll start off with a bit of a broad question of how did you get started on radio?
How did I get started on radio?
Were you thrown on the deep end?
I was indeed. So I'm really old. And so I started in science communication before social media and before podcasting. So I ended up with a job working as the communications officer. The name was longer than that, but that's effectively what it was, for the Weight Research Institute, which is very similar to the Institute of Agriculture right here at UWA. And that institute had been set up. They had some people that were really interested in the sort of new technology that was coming along at the time. Web 2.0 had just started, and so there was always the intent that there would be online material coming from the research centre, but the people with the technical skills had no knowledge about science communication. So it was like just an audio clip with nothing, no context. It would just be put on the website. So we wanted to move down here, and I wanted to develop that a bit more and make it into something where that audio would have a context put around it. There would be more of a purpose. There would be thinking about the audience. There would be a real message in it. And the University of Adelaide at the time actually owned a community radio station called Radio Adelaide. And so we went to them and said, we want to develop a podcast. And the manager of Radio Adelaide said, well, if you want a podcast, what you need is a radio show, because the radio show going live every week will give you 3 podcasts. So that's what we ended up doing, was the Institute sponsored a community radio program which went out live every week. I worked with one of the radio producers. He's now a journalist in the UK, but he was from news media background. And the idea was that we would get the scientists to come in and be on live radio, and it would be training for them, because of course it's community radio, so no one's actually listening, even though it's live. So it was terrifying enough. And that meant that I did a Certificate 3 in radio production through that. So did all the technical and all of that. But it was that experience of doing live radio that I think really has allowed me to draw on that sort of muscle memory, by doing it every week for however long the program was. I think we did 2 seasons, and all the preparation for that. And that, just really helps me dial into that quicker now.
Yeah. So the learning curve that sort of came with that, and especially as you got further into your career, did you find that it was incredibly helpful to have that experience?
Right, absolutely, which is why I almost teach podcasting from the point of view of radio first.
Yeah.
Because I think good podcasts are good radio, and the principles of audio production and the principles of asking questions and that interaction, I think are the same. And if you can do live radio, then you can do a podcast, rather than the other way around.
Yes,
actually.
Yeah. And did you have a sort of key technique that you sort of used, or something that you brought into each of these interviews?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you used a tennis analogy, because that was very similar to how I would initially view the rhythm, the prosody, if you like, the cadence of an interview. But if you stick with the tennis analogy, it's just bang, 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 bang. And if you want examples of interviews like that, watch football interviews. I've been watching them lately, and I've been getting into it. And the interviewer asks a question, footballer will answer it. Interviewer asks a question, footballer will answer it. So it is ping, ping, but it doesn't have the flow. And what I think live radio needs, even if it's for a very short interview, for me the analogy is a game of hacky sack, where you still have the ball, which is the idea of the moment or the conversation in the air, but I'm going to toss it to myself a couple of times. I want to throw up a few opportunities for you to come back to me, and then I'll ping it to you. And a bit like what you were doing in the original interview, where you sort of said something and I actually said out loud, I'll come back to that later. I probably wouldn't do that live, and I just would come back to it. But it's like you kind of threw the ball in the air about 3 or 4 times, and I was like, I could catch that one, but I won't yet. I could catch that, but I won't yet. But I've made sure that I've thrown the ball up a few times ready for you. And that's even as an interviewee. I've done that where, and this is where it's tricky for us because we're on both sides. When I've been the interviewee and I'm being interviewed by somebody who I know knows nothing about the topic, and particularly somebody, even if I can't see them because they're in another state, I really have to be conscious of when I'm tossing that ball up, because I'm trying to make sure that I get my message out, as well as making it really obvious for that person who can't see my body language.
Yes, yeah.
Of when I'm throwing that ball back up and what opportunities they can have to grab onto that.
Mm. So, and this might get a little bit meta, what sort of balls were you throwing up just then to me?
Probably not too many in that particular monologue, but I was remembering the bits earlier. Because even with that one, I was probably going down a single explanation where I was saying there's this metaphor and you want to keep it in the air. Probably not too many. But if I was to switch and start to talk about, and again, this is me being an interviewee, So the recent example, I recently did an interview on an article that I wrote about milk. And it's not my core research. It's something that I've been fascinated with about because I love seeing mammalian secretions. But we can't, it wasn't something I really wanted to talk about in depth. But the point I wanted to make, what I really wanted to make was, isn't it interesting how important language is? Mm-hmm. And that language, words become social and not just scientific, and that science communication is about how words are both social and scientific. So I wanted to have my meta message, my main message that I wanted to get through was actually something about science communication and not milk at all. Mm. So that's where I would answer his question about milk, so he said, so what is it called? And we were talking about, it has to be called plant-based beverages. But then I would be talking about something, and one of my sort of regular things that I have in my back pocket is, but we ask a lot of food, we ask it to be tasty, we ask it to be affordable, we ask it to be produced in a way that doesn't minimize the harm the environment. And so I would have answered the question, but then I would have thrown up 2 or 3 other possibilities for questions of areas that I would feel more comfortable talking in. So I'm trying to direct the interview, even when I'm the interviewee. Yeah. But that's because I've been trained and because, I can't help myself.
How much do you think this sort of style is conversational versus that sort of meta thought? Because, at the moment we're not really having a conversation, but throwing those balls up is what you do in a conversation, for someone else to grab. How do you bring it down to a conversational level without making it too conversational level?
I think first of all, if you've kind of dialed into the moment and you're like, okay, yes, this is a podcast or this is radio, because the environment feels so weird, you're never going to be completely relaxed. It's never going to be a complete conversation where you kind of forget the record buttons on. Yeah. So I don't think I think there's just part of the muscle memory that works there. But sometimes the conversation does fall flat and you have to restart it. And on live radio, that can be hard. When people's body language shifts, you can tell. But if you can't see that, you have to be really listening to the voice and be ready to throw that up again. I think for me, I am far more conscious about making sure that those entry points and that I land on my key messages as an interviewee than I would be in a conversation. And as an interviewer, if we were just down the pub having a chat, I wouldn't be trying to get, as an interviewer, I wouldn't be trying to get those nuggets of gold. Like in a conversation, it doesn't matter. I mean, everything you give me is gold in the conversations we have anyway. But, it's that's the title of the paper, or that's the one that's the one to put in the bank, those nuggets of gold. And I think that's when I'm interviewing, that's still what I'm trying to get out of. And the luxury you have when you're not live is that you can always go back. But there are sometimes that it does fall flat, that it kind of ends, that the hacky sack just lands on the floor and you have to pick it up again.
Yeah. So you mentioned then that, you've done those sort of interviews where you can't see someone on the phone or, on a Zoom call without any visual.
That last one was on an app on my phone, so of course I didn't even know whether it was working.
Yeah. And how do you even tackle that? I mean, like you said, the body language is so important to be able to have that hacky sack game. And were there any experiences where it did just fall and you were like, oh?
There's definitely been instances where I'm letting that one fall. Not touching that. And again, as an interviewee, that's when I'm like, I've always got my key messages in my back pocket and I will just do the politician and not answer the question, just say what I was going to say anyway. As an interviewer, when it falls flat, and again, it depends on why. Is it because you didn't ask the right question? Is it because you strayed off topic? Is it because you started to say something that they don't want to say? And so either going back or restating a question again, allowing them to pick up that thread and sort of, oh, that's right, I'm tossing the ball up over here. And that's why making notes and doing all that active listening is really so important. But I think, and now this is one where if this was live, I would have to just keep talking because I've actually forgotten what the question was.
I was talking about the not being on seeing the person.
Oh, yeah, not seeing the person. That's right. So, if we were live, I would have probably just had to answer there. Or I have actually said live on radio a couple of times and I just confess and go, sorry, I can't remember what the question was. In fact, I think I might have said that, not in the last one, the one before. Yeah, the one before. Kev actually remembers it. I've actually gone, you know what? Sorry, I can't remember it. And for me, I'm just like, perimenopause is so fun, everybody. I can't remember my own name. So for me, when I'm talking with somebody who I can't physically see, I try to channel all of that body language into my voice. And it's almost exaggerated. It's a good thing no one can see me because I'm usually grinning like an idiot.
Yeah.
And even when I'm in a radio studio and I've got the microphone in front of me, because I use my hands when I speak, I've got to make sure that the microphone is not likely to be hit by my hands, but I will actually use them to speak more when I can't be seen than I would when I am. Like I'm actually would be overemphasizing to try and get that warmth and fullness in my voice, so that I am bringing that my emotional state through my voice more than I would if I was speaking one-on-one with somebody.
Yes. Painfully familiar with the, hi, how are you?
Yeah, and we know that we do that, and sometimes it feels disingenuous, but it's a way to bring that energy back and think about that prosody and that melody and the variety and the diversity in our voices.
Cool. Well, thank you for answering that one. So, I mean, we'll move on to sort of the importance, I guess, of practicing this sort of thing and how unique this sort of, I guess it is a type of conversation we have, really. How do you practice to do this? Because as you said before, it's inherently not normal. You don't talk to people like this.
That's right. And so I think for practicing there does have to be something that makes it unfamiliar. So you have to be out of your learning zone is outside of your comfort zone, but not in your discomfort zone. But there has to be that little thing that gives it an edge, so that you are practicing that in the moment to acquire that muscle memory. And so that isn't just having a conversation. I think you have to kind of go, let's press record. So that there's something that actually tells your mind, no, this is a podcast now. This is not just a conversation. But then practicing that and practicing going, thinking through, maybe if you're practicing with someone like the practice session we're about to go into now, because I know that we're starting to run close on time, is to think, well, how am I going to get those nuggets of gold? And so I would agree on what the nuggets of gold should be. What are the beats? What are the hacky sack moments that we're looking for in the air? And then practicing that to and fro, and adopting that position of interviewer and interviewee, so that it's really clear who's doing what. But it just practice, and it can't just be practicing on your own. I think you do have to practice in the moment.
Yeah.
There has to be something that's just slightly outside of your comfort zone.
Yes.
So that you'll practice becoming comfortable with that as well.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Heather, for joining me for today's episode.
Thanks for listening. Find us online at SciCommCollective.com. That's com with 2 M's. Questions or comments about today's episode? Get in touch on Instagram at the SciComm Collective.